On October 11th, 1871, in Medicine Bow, Wyoming, an old cowboy by the name of Harlan Grace told a strange and frightening story to Sheriff John McClinchy and his deputy, M.K. Boswell. What happened later that night shook the small town of Medicine Bow to its core, and it was never the same. Outside of Medicine Bow, no one believed the events that unfolded that night. Sheriff McClinchy was known throughout the Wyoming Territory to be an upstanding man in all the years he was sheriff. This is the story as told by Sheriff McClinchy to Judge A.C. Campbell the following morning, after what became famously known as the incident. The following story has been transcribed to present-day English. Last night, during the terrible thunderstorm, as the rain beat down on the tin roof of the jail, Deputy Boswell and I were drinking coffee, talking about the possibility of an upcoming harsh winter Wyoming is well known for. There was a pause in our conversation when all of a sudden we heard a knock on the front door. It startled us some, and Deputy Boswell, being closer to the door, stood up, walked over, and opened the door. When he opened the door, a dirty, older gentleman wearing nothing but ragged clothing collapsed to the floor. I stood up from my chair and went over to the gentleman to see about helping him. I proceeded to ask him if he was all right. He was clearly hypothermic and looked like he hadn't eaten in a good long while. One thing I noticed rather quickly, I'd say, was there was something unusual about his skin. Sometimes a man's skin will turn to leather after being in the sun for a long time, but this was different. Something did not seem right to me about his skin. It bothered me. He then started whispering something, so Deputy Boswell and I leaned in closer so we could hear him. He said something very strange. It didn't make any sense. He said, "I hear crows screaming. Every night as I go to sleep. Every night I burn." Deputy Boswell and I gave each other confused looks. I thought he was talking strange because hypothermia was setting in. We proceeded to pick him up, putting him in a chair by the stove to try warming him up. I told Deputy Boswell to pour him a hot cup of coffee to see if we could warm up his insides. After that, I told him to go down to the saloon to see about fetching the man some food. While Deputy Boswell was fetching the food, I asked the gentleman his name. He sat there, cup of coffee in hand, for a while before he finally spoke. He said his name was Harlan Grace, but he wasn't sure where he was before he stumbled into our jail. He said he had a hard time remembering much of anything, except for something he later told us, something that scared Deputy Boswell and I, something awful. I let the old man sit for a bit, waiting for Deputy Boswell to come back before I asked him any more questions. When Deputy Boswell came back, he handed the food to the old man and we let him eat. The old man ate like he hadn't eaten in years. Once he finished eating, he set his plate down on the ground next to him and just stared at the fire crackling in the stove. Several minutes went by before he spoke, saying the same exact thing he had said earlier. "I hear crows screaming. Every night as I go to sleep. Every night I burn." This time I asked him what he meant by that. He continued looking into the fire, then proceeded to tell Deputy Boswell and I the most frightening tale we'd ever heard. He said, "I'm never in the same place twice. Every day I wake up in a strange place. When I go to sleep at night, the crows come to me, screaming at me. Not long after the crows come, the apparition comes and takes me away to a place that is dark beyond words. The apparition tells me to do things, horrible things. If I refuse, I burn." I then asked him what kinds of horrible things this apparition tells him to do. He slowly looked over at me and said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Things I'm going to hell for when I die." Right then, it felt like something dark entered the room. Deputy Boswell and I looked around expecting to see the devil himself appear, but there was nothing to see with our naked eyes. We knew this wasn't the case. Something was most definitely there. It just wasn't showing itself. We both turned our gaze back to the old man, who had now gone silent, as he sat there glaring into the fire. Deputy Boswell and I looked at each other, not knowing what to say or what to do next. We slowly sat back down in our chairs and continued giving each other concerned looks. My first thought was this old man was drunk, but I could smell no alcohol in him. The thought then crossed my mind he might not be right in the head, but he didn't seem to be the crazy type either. We sat there for a spell before I spoke up, suggesting the old man spend the night in one of our jail cells. The rain was still pouring, and he'd most certainly die if he went back out into the cold. He turned his head to me and nodded in agreement. Since the rain was coming down so hard, Deputy Boswell and I decided to spend the night there as well. Our homes were a bit out of the way, and there were plenty of beds in the jail. As I sat there thinking, I thought it'd be best if we locked the cell the old man would be sleeping in. It was obvious he wasn't armed, as he wasn't wearing much in the way of clothing, but I didn't know him, and therefore didn't trust him. After I finished my cup of coffee, I noticed my head was starting to droop, which meant it was time to lock the old man in the cell before I dozed off to sleep. I then explained to the old man why we needed to lock the cell he'd be sleeping in. He didn't say anything. Again, he just nodded his head in agreement, stood up, walked over, got into one of the cells, and lay down on the bed. I put a few more pieces of wood and some coal into the stove, so it'd be going all night, then went into one of the empty cells and lay down on the bed. As I slept, I started having the strangest and scariest dreams. I was surrounded by screaming crows, and it involved a demon, the kind of demon Father McMurdy talks about in church on Sundays. The demon was telling me to do things, awful things. It told me to slit Deputy Boswell's throat with the bone-handled knife I always keep on my side. If I didn't do as I was told, I would burn. I remember suddenly waking up, sweating quite profusely. I looked over towards Boswell's direction, and he was fast asleep, snoring loudly as he usually does. I had to turn around to look in the old man's direction, and as I did, I jumped up in horror, as the old man was nowhere in sight, which was unbelievable due to the fact I'd personally locked the cell and knew I'd done so correctly. I yelled at Boswell to wake up, saying, "Get up, the old man has vanished." He fell off the bed onto the floor with a thud. As Boswell was getting himself off the floor, I was running over to the cell. I grabbed the door's bars to see if it was in fact locked. Like I figured, it was. I fumbled for the cell keys, and after a bit of fumbling, I unlocked the cell. As I opened the door, Boswell showed up by my side. We both stood there looking at the floor with looks of dread on our faces. There on the floor was a burn mark in the shape of a man. A strange feeling suddenly overcame me. It looked as if I was looking through a mask and not my own eyes. I watched as my hand grabbed my bone-handled knife from its sheath. I turned to face Boswell, and without thinking, I sliced through his throat. He grabbed his neck as blood squirted everywhere. He fell down to the floor on his knees, screaming out as life slipped away from his body. I tried commanding my body to move, but it was like something else was controlling it. All I could do was stand in the same spot, and stood there till morning, knife in hand. It wasn't until mid-morning someone came to the jail to call on me. They opened the door saying, "Sheriff, are you here?" It didn't take them long to find me standing over the dead, bloodied body of Deputy Boswell, as they screamed out in horror. Judge A.C. Campbell was called to the jail shortly after and ordered Sheriff McClinchy to be locked up in a cell. The sheriff then told his side of the story to Judge Campbell. Judge Campbell sent someone to fetch Marshal Langston, who was in charge of the territory. It would take several days for the marshal to arrive. They cleaned up Boswell's body that day and left Sheriff McClinchy locked in a cell. When the person in charge of bringing Sheriff McClinchy food and water arrived the following day, Sheriff McClinchy was gone, having mysteriously vanished from his cell. Marshal Langston arrived 2 days later and began his investigation. He quickly formed a search party, believing he had somehow escaped or someone let him out, since there was no evidence or signs of him breaking out of the cell. Over the next few years, Marshal Langston and a few of his men scoured Wyoming looking for Sheriff McClinchy. Wanted posters were put up in every city as far away as Montana, Utah, Colorado, and Idaho. Reports of people seeing Sheriff McClinchy would surface here and there, but no trace of him was ever found. Other than Sheriff McClinchy's side of the story, the burn mark on the cell floor, in the shape of a human body, was never explained. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.